There's a pocket knife on this kitchen table that my daddy gave me in December of 1962. I was 13 years old. He pressed it into my hand out by the wood box and said, "Here, boy, take care of it." That was the entire speech. And I said, "Yes, sir." And I have taken care of it for 64 years. I use it every day to cut twine, to sharpen a pencil, to peel an apple on a winter evening. The blade's been reset twice. The handle is smooth where my thumb sits. I reckon that knife has done more honest work in this kitchen than most things I own. And it is the warmest thing my daddy ever gave me. I don't say that to wound him. Earl Wilson was a good man. He worked the coal mines from age 14 until the seams gave out. And then he found other work and kept on finding it until the black lung took him at 60. He never complained. He kept his family fed on not very much for a very long time. He was not a cold man. He was a man who had been taught that love was something you did with your hands, not something you said with your mouth. He did it. Every single day of his life, he did it. But I want to talk tonight about why men stop being men. I aim to get there before we're through. The answer I've come to is not what most people think. And before I say it, I need to tell you about some men I knew. Because the answer isn't out there in the modern world somewhere. The answer is in my daddy's hands pressing that knife into mine in 1962 and believing with his whole heart that it was enough. Sit a spell with me tonight. If you've ever loved a man who could not tell you what he felt, or if you've ever been that man, I'd be grateful if you'd stay to the end. And if anything I say tonight sounds like somebody you knew, say so in the comments. Say you were here. The next person who finds this is going to need to know somebody came before them. Now, I want to name something first because I think the way people talk about this is wrong. People say men stop being men. They say it like men woke up one morning and decided to set something down. Like they looked at what their fathers were and chose something smaller on purpose. I don't believe that. I see men who can split a cord of wood before breakfast and cannot tell their wives they are grateful to have them. I see fathers who work 6 days a week to put their children through school and cannot sit in the front row at the school play because something in them locks up at the door. I see husbands who would walk into a burning building for the woman they love and cannot sit across from her at the kitchen table and say the words she has been waiting 30 years to hear. I see all of that. I have seen it my entire life. And I know this particular silence from the inside because I lived it. That is not strength. Silence is not strength. Silence is fear with better manners. Here is what I think happened. It comes in stages. First, a boy watches his father come home tired and quiet and not complaining, and he thinks that is what a man looks like. Second, the boy grows up keeping the quiet himself, because the quiet was what got his daddy through. And if it worked for the father, it ought to work for the son. Third, the man's wife learns not to ask. She reads the quiet as the price of the marriage and pays it year after year. Fourth, the man dies, and his wife stands at the graveside not knowing whether he was happy with her or just too tired to leave. And their son is standing next to her, already on stage 1. That is not men stopping being men. That is a wound passed from father to son across 4 generations and called character every time it changes hands. Men in these mountains learn to love in one language, the language of doing. You put up the cord of wood and called it love. You came home every night and called it love. You kept your word and didn't raise your hand and didn't leave and called all of it love. And for a long time, in a world where the farm needed tending and the mine needed working and the children needed feeding, being present was the same as being loved. The man had a place where the doing was enough. Used to could a man prove his care by outlasting the cold. Now the furnace does it. Used to could a man earn his place by knowing the land. That knowledge lives in a phone now. The weight the man used to carry went somewhere else. And the man sat down in a chair and people said, "What happened to him? What happened to the men?" What happened is they lost the only vessel they had for the love they were carrying. That is not a man who stopped caring. That is a man who lost the only way he knew to show it. And nobody offered him a new way. And nobody taught him to ask for one. I want to tell you about a summer afternoon in 1965. I was 13. No, I was 12. It was the summer before Curtis got his draft notice. I was working the bottom and I was worn to the bone in a way I hadn't been worn before. Earl and I were on the back porch in the evening, and I asked him, "Daddy, don't you ever get tired of it? Don't you ever just want to sit down and tell somebody how hard it is?" He looked at me a long moment. Then he said, "A man does what needs doing. He don't talk about it." And I believed every word of it. I carried that sentence for 60 years. I believed it when I was 20 and when I was 40. And I believed it when Martha was dying in the bedroom I built onto this cabin in 1973. When she needed tending and I tended her every way a man can. And I did not talk about how any of it felt. I believed Earl's sentence right up until the morning in late October 2024. When I walked out onto the back porch and said her name out loud in the cold. Martha, just her name. And something cracked open in me that had been sealed 60 years. My daddy was right about nearly everything. He was right about wood and weather and tools and how a ridge looks before a hard storm. He was right about the character it takes to carry a heavy thing without complaint. He was wrong about that sentence. Here's the metaphor I've been sitting with. Every fall for 47 years, I put up a cord of wood for this family. 6 cords before hard winter. Split them from green oak and ash. Stacked them under the overhang. Had the fire burning by the first hard cold. I never once said to Martha, "I did this for you. I did this because I am afraid of you being cold. I did this because the thought of you cold in this cabin is one of the worst thoughts I carry." She saw the pile. She felt the warmth. But she could not eat the wood. She could not carry it to bed on the nights the cold came through the walls, and she needed something warm beside her. She needed the words too. And the words I never gave her. The cord of wood. That's the whole thing. That's what happened to the men. They put up the cord, year after year, and never said what it was for. And then the world changed and the cord wasn't enough, and they didn't have anything else. I said I'd get there. That's where I got. Now I want to tell you about some men I knew, because my story is one story, and the silence I'm describing runs through every hollow in these mountains. My neighbor Henry. He's older than me by some. He married a woman named Darlene around 1971, and they sat across from each other at the same kitchen table for 43 years. When Darlene passed, Henry called me the morning after the funeral, at 7 o'clock, which is not a thing Henry has ever done before or since. He said, "Pap, the house is plumb quiet." I said, "Do you miss her, Henry?" He sat on the line a while. Then he said, "I miss the noise, not her voice, not her face, the noise." Because what Henry had lived with for 43 years wasn't a wife the way a wife ought to be lived with. It was the sound of another person being alive in the same building. He never crossed the distance between them, and she is gone and the chance with her. And Henry is still in that house, still eating breakfast alone at a 4-seat table. There is no redemption in Henry's story that I know of. Just Henry in the silence he once called strength, understanding now what it cost him. I knew a man in Marlinton named Wendell, retired school teacher, about 73 now, I reckon. He lost his wife Dorothy 8 years ago. Wendell told me something one Sunday after church that I have not been able to put down. He said, "Pap, I spent 40 years performing the man instead of being one." He'd spent his whole marriage making sure the family had everything. The providing, the protecting, the steadiness, and had never once asked Dorothy what she needed that couldn't be solved by labor or money. He said the day after she died, he felt relief, just for one day, because the performance was over. And then the relief became the worst thing he'd ever felt, because he understood what it meant. He'd been exhausted. He'd been pretending for 40 years instead of just being with her. Wendell teaches Sunday school now. His hands shake a little when he talks about Dorothy. He's getting somewhere, but he got there without her. Then there was Hollis, my hunting partner near 40 years. He died of a heart attack in November. I believe it was 2018, out in the woods on a cold morning, first week of deer season. He was 68. We were fixing to head up the ridge when he sat down in the leaves and didn't get up. Hollis was the best man in the woods I have ever known. Patient, quiet. He didn't waste a shot in 40 years. He read the mountain the way a preacher reads scripture, not for show, just for understanding. He was the kind of man you don't find twice in a life. I never told him that, not once. The words were there. I was not too busy. 30 seconds it would have cost me. I did not say it because men like us did not say such things to one another. And we were both comfortable with that arrangement. And now Hollis is in the ground, and the arrangement outlasted him. I don't know whether he knew. I hope he did. I'll never know. That is not what the good Lord had in mind for friendship. That is two men walking up a ridge for 40 years, one of them dying without ever hearing from the other one what he meant. Now I want to say something about my son Daniel. He's 56 years old, lives in Charlotte, 6 hours from here. He calls every first Sunday of the month at 4 in the afternoon. We talk about 23 minutes. We talk about the weather, the price of feed, his job, his kids. In 23 years of those calls, I cannot tell you once I said, "Daniel, I love you, son. I love you and I am proud of you, and I am glad you are mine." Not once. Not because I don't feel it. I feel it every day since the hour he was born. But my daddy never said it to me. And I understood from watching him that this was how it was done. The love was in the showing up. I taught my boy the same silence I was handed. Not cruelly, not on purpose. I thought I was being a man. I was modeling the wound. And that's mine to carry. There is a word for what happened to men. Not a complicated word. The word is silence, not quiet. Quiet is what a man chooses. Silence is what gets chose for you before you're old enough to understand what's being handed over. And you carry it so long it starts to feel like skin. And by the time you recognize what it is, most of the people you should have said something to are already in the ground. Now let me say something plain about my daddy. Earl Wilson was not a cold man. He was a fellow captive. His own father handed him the silence 40 years before, and his grandfather before that, going back into these mountains further than any of us can see. Earl built this cabin with his own hands, kept his family fed, loved the people in this house every day in the only language he knew. He was not a villain. He was not a free man either. The silence he passed to me was love's best available substitute. And he passed it forward as the real thing, because nobody had ever shown him the real thing. That knife is real. The love in that knife is real. I just needed something more than the knife. Now, I want to mention something before I let you go tonight. I've gone back and forth on saying this, and I'll probably cut this part before I post. And then I won't, because Ruth Ann would never forgive me if I did. So I'll say it. About a year after Martha passed, I started writing letters. By hand at this kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. Letters to Martha. Letters to my boy Caleb, who died in 2009. Letters to my daddy Earl, who died of black lung in 1968. Letters to my brother Curtis, who came home from Vietnam in a box in 1969. I called it The Things We Don't Say. Letters I should have given when there was still somebody to give them to. They weren't meant to be a book. They were a way to get the words out of me. I'd held them in 50, 60 years. I wasn't going to show them to anybody. Then Ruth Ann came by one Wednesday evening with supper and saw the box on the table. Before I could say anything, she was on the back porch reading. She came back inside and said, "Daddy, you gotta let other people see these. There's mamas out there. There's widows out there." I said no for about 3 months. She has her mother's stubbornness. I eventually said yes. I've heard from some women since then. A woman named Mabel in Kentucky, 81 years old, lost her husband 9 years ago. She wrote her own letters to him and took them to his grave and read them out loud. Said it was the first time she'd cried in 7 years. A woman named Verna in Ohio, 74. Her son hadn't called in 2 years. She wrote him a letter and mailed it. He called the day he got it. They talked 2 hours. A woman named Pearl in Pennsylvania, 80 years old, lost a son to addiction. Hadn't been able to say his name out loud in 11 years. After she read the letter I wrote to Caleb, she said her boy's name at the kitchen sink 3 times. Then she made his favorite dinner. My son Daniel saw the book this week. He doesn't think I should have put it out there. Says it's family business. Says his mother wouldn't have wanted strangers reading her letters. He might be right. I might take it down. I'm still thinking on it. If you want to read it, you might want to do that now, before I decide. I put a link in the first pinned comment under this video. It's there if you need it. That's all I'll say. Anyway, where was I? Right, I was telling you about the cord of wood. Every fall for 47 years, long after the children left this house, long after it was just Martha and me, and then just me, I put up the cord. 6 cords before hard winter. I put them up this past fall, too. I don't need 6 cords for one man. I put them up because the splitting is the only thing left in my life that still says what I cannot say any other way. It's the language I know. Martha's Bible is still on the side table. Her reading glasses are still on the nightstand. And I split a little wood most mornings that doesn't need splitting. And I say her name out loud. And I think about what the cord of wood was always trying to say. A woman wrote to me a while back and said she'd made her peace with not knowing whether her husband had been happy with her. I think about her. The women who read The Quiet is Love were not wrong to read it that way. It was love. The cord is real. What the cord cannot do is keep somebody warm after they are gone from the other side of the bed. If you're listening to me tonight, friend, sitting somewhere alone, maybe in a house with too many rooms in it now, I want to say this directly to you. If you have loved your people in the only language you were given, and you are wondering whether it was enough, I am not going to tell you it was. What I know is there is still time. Whatever is left does not have to be silent. You can say the thing. Say it tonight. It will not ruin you. The mountain's gonna get its first frost one of these mornings. Won't be long. I'll be out here when it comes, the way I always am, with a tin mug gone cold in my hand, saying her name. Like I said earlier, the letters are in the pinned comment if you need them. Spruce Creek keeps running under the ice in winter, runs in the cold and the dark, and doesn't stop for either one. You don't have to stop either. I am a late man, friend. Don't you be one too.